Hello, my name's Justin. I don't know how the hell I'm going to get this out, since as far as I'm aware there's nobody sane left on social media or in public. All I hope at this point is that I'm not the only person who's fallen victim to whatever's been happening in the past 2 months. As long as everything stands, I don't think I'll ever be able to explain what's happening. At this point, I'm unsure whether or not it's these things that made their way here, or the fact that I'm practically starving to death that's slowly causing me to lose my grip on reality. Though I'd give you more credit than myself if you said it was both. For the last 5 days, all I've heard outside of my apartment is solemn silence. But I know for a fact that there is definitely something out there. Whatever these things are, they came without safety or surprise, or to my mind, even an intent. But it's obvious they're now claiming the world as theirs, assuming they even feel any sense of volition. This all began around 2 months ago. If this takes decades, or hell, even centuries to find, all I can tell you is that the current date is sometime in June of 2020. The exact day is already beyond me. Either I can't find a calendar anywhere, or I'm simply forgetting things. I'll admit I've never had the best memory, though everything I remember before this event is gradually becoming more ambiguous. I had just rented an apartment, thankfully before the pandemic stripped everybody of their living costs, and my school resorted to doing all work online. Thankfully, this meant I no longer had to risk driving through a congested parking space, but then again, not having the opportunity to meet anyone familiar at the entrance was enough to deal a hard blow on my mental health. The clearest chronicle of events I have by this point, before everything becomes hazy, begins when I woke up one morning to see the state governor issuing a lockdown order due to rising infections with what the president called the China virus. I'm thankful that I never managed to catch it, though in hindsight, I'd rather be sick with a flu-like virus than live for weeks as a recluse as the world ends around me. Long story impeccably short, it suddenly became a rarity to see anyone in public not wearing a mask, and I watched as social media blew up with people making up conspiracy theories suggesting that the pandemic was emboldened as a result of a biological warfare operation, and not over the fact we had an incompetent administration handling it. I try not to sound biased, especially since all these people probably either succumbed to the infection beforehand, or were consumed by these things that fell out of the sky a few weeks ago. But it's the best to give whoever's reading this a little perspective. Highways became desolate, and populated city parks turned into breeding grounds for protests, racial or not, overtaken by the environment. It didn't help that only a few days before everything came to an end, that the George Floyd protests came straight to the neighborhood outside my complex. While I'd be one to support any kind of cause, in my town these protests only came with vandalism and fires, as well as brutal reactions by local law enforcement. Though it wasn't the apocalypse, at least not just yet, people began stockpiling paper towels, food, and snacks for themselves as if everybody infected with this virus would die, then come back with an insatiable appetite for brains. Walmart practically became a compilation of weird scenes in what most people would call a gold mine, while my closest friends, online and in real life, seemed to immerse themselves in the world of psychedelics to relieve the mood. I mostly just sat inside my apartment, watching television and putting in minimal effort to the assignments posted online. As serious as the situation was, I took great enjoyment watching television anchors and pundits push one another to the brink of verbal insults over the crisis as well as the protests. My mind was mostly occupied with the thought of a utopian paradise following the quarantine. One that would be in essence limitless and free, though I think these fantasies would have been comparatively nothing to all the stuff I read on Twitter and Facebook threads. I recall seeing a woman from Tennessee warning of a race war that would lead to whites basically ruling the world, though the only favorable responses were vague and came from her own family members. Though, as the number of cases and deaths rose, my hopes only faded. As all the food ran out in my apartment, I decided that the next best way to uplift the mood was to get blind drunk at a friend's house, something expected of a jaded teenager without much care for the consequences of his actions. Unfortunately, most, if not all, of my friends had either come down sick or had become paranoid due to the unprecedented situation. Some had resorted to moving back in with their parents due to dwindling financial abilities. I visited my friend Anton, who, while a former track star and a fledgling employee of a local Taco Bell, would have seemed the most entertaining person to hang out with. I'll be honest though, when I say that my visit there wasn't the greatest. He came to the door obviously intoxicated, appearing to have wanted to drown himself in alcohol to end his deflated mood with a stopper. It wasn't long though before I found myself in the same situation. I do recall, however, seeing a notification on his phone from Apple News reading about strange cosmological activity occurring near Jupiter, or something along those lines. Though it was obscured seconds later by another flurry of notifications detailing the same repetitive information about the pandemic. I asked Anton about it, and his response within his drunken slur was that it was sent by alien fanatics, apparently maintaining some form of common sense within his disevolved state of mind, despite suspecting minutes earlier that Dr. Fauci could be some sort of evil leprechaun in disguise. Since I'm not at all familiar with beverages, it didn't take me long to become sober, and it was around 8 by the time I left his house. It was at this point, however, that things began to get even stranger. While driving home, I noticed that the most familiar route had been blocked by an odd obstruction in the local road, and while there were traffic cones surrounding the entrance to the highway, there were no construction workers in sight, only a sign reading that there was danger on the edge of town. Because of this, I took the westbound route, meaning that I would have to run through a generally desolate area of town, with decayed suburbs filled to the brim with overgrowth, and old-fashioned houses that either crackheads or old couples too resistant to enroll in a retirement home tended to live in. For the first 10 minutes or so, I had turned on the radio to perhaps pick up music, but instead, all I received was unintelligible gobbles made from either murmurs or foreign-sounding voices, occasionally dispersing a repeat of the final chorus of "All Apologies" by Nirvana. I listened closer, and noticed after searching up the pronunciation that the murmurs were repeating the words Talmud, Koher, and Megiddo in different variations of one another. After about 7 miles of driving, the broadcast cut off and was replaced with local news reports that I tuned out due to a lack of interest. After arriving at my apartment, I collapsed on the rug overlooking the television, which I had absent-mindedly forgotten to turn off that morning. Despite having been awake for nearly 15 hours, I awoke at 2 in the morning to the sound of a scream. It wasn't emitted from anywhere outside, and after looking at the TV, I noticed that there appeared to be a live broadcast of a news crew pointing at tentacled, geometric shapes falling from the sky somewhere in Los Angeles, before promptly being forced off the air. The broadcast was interspersed with random symbols I didn't recognize, as well as an anchorman reciting a bunch of gibberish during what would have been a televised debate covering the protests. The screen cut to black, and I was met with an EAS alert warning of a severe meteorological event taking place across multiple different locations worldwide. The alert asserted that all civilians stay inside, without any clear information on what the threat was, or what type of response it would receive. I only took the liberty of looking outside once, and was met with a sight that was by any means inane. I saw as blistered and convulsing masses rolled out of the sky through flashes of multicolored but silent lightning, and began grotesquely transforming any organisms they came in contact with. While still hypnagogic, I ran to my bathroom, grabbing my laptop off my desk and locking the door whilst using a stool to barricade it, though I doubt this would serve as any kind of protection against whatever was outside. Over the next few days, I heard panicked screams, laughter, and churning sounds that I assumed were the people who had the audacity to venture outside, only to be met with whatever had fallen out of the sky. Since then, all I've heard is occasional ruffles, though it's almost overridden by almost ear-splitting silence, if that's how I can describe it. For the last few days, all I wanted is to let starvation take me away before those things outside do. It'd be a miracle by this point if there was anybody else who hasn't been consumed by these beings and the madness they induce. It hurts to set you free, but you'll never follow me. The end of laughter and soft lies. The end of nights we tried to die. This is the end.